Alrighty, in this video what we're going to do is put together a component that's not going to look like our big class thing. It's going to be what's called a stateless component. And what it's going to be is just a function. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, because this is a component, we got to make sure to keep it with start the word with an uppercase character. Again, that's important because otherwise JSX will assume that it is an HTML element and not a custom component. We're going to call this to-do list, and it's going to take in a value called props, and it's going to return JSX. So let's just return a P element with, actually, let's return a UL and with an LI to-do list, right? So we're just going to keep it like that for now. Then I'm going to go ahead and collapse the constructor of app component. So take a last look at it for now, if you want. Then what I'm going to do is on the render of the app component, underneath our label, I'm going to go ahead and create it. So I'm going to say to-do list. And what you'll see here is that will actually go out and create that component. We can even see it in the React Explorer. We can see to-do list right here as a custom component, and we can see it's emitting a UL with a single LI. So what's going on here? Well, this is what's called a stateless component. And a stateless component, not surprisingly, doesn't have state. A stateless component is just a function that takes in properties and then renders JSX elements, renders shadow DOM. And it's also, you can call these pure components because they're not going to modify any state or really do anything except render something out. So they're a very convenient way to create very simple components that just respond to the properties that have been sent to them and nothing else. They don't handle, well, they could handle events, but we'll see how that works here soon. But they don't have state. They're not a class. They're like component lights, I guess. But it's very important that, generally speaking, you will often want to use as many stateless components as possible because they're really easy to reason about. They're really easy to look at. And a lot of people use stateless components for the majority of their view and then have stateful components. All the stateful components do is just kind of hook them all together and perform the business logic of the application or communicate with the model. So the next question is how do we get the list of to-dos into the to-do list component? Because he doesn't have access to any of the state of the app component. Well, the answer is through props. Let's go ahead and console log out our props. If we do that, in our console, we'll see we get an empty object. But not surprisingly, if I come down here to the render function of the app component where the to-do list is instantiated, I can say ble equals woe. Hit Control S. And now the props received by the to-do list is an object containing a property ble with the value of woe. We can even look at that in the React Dev Tools, where we can see the props is read-only ble as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and pass in our to-dos. This is going to be interesting because we need to filter them depending on if we have show completed set to true or not. So right here in my render function, I'm going to re-expand this so you guys can see the structure of my to-do objects. I'm going to ask for filter and to-dos, and then I'm going to say const filtered to-dos equals, and then I'm going to say filter dot show completed question mark, so I'm using a ternary, to-dos, otherwise to-dos dot filter, to-do goes into not to-do is completed. So now we'll have an array that will contain a list of to-dos based off of whether or not show completed is true on the filter object. And so now what we can do is instead of passing ble equals woe into to-do list, I can go ahead and pass in to-dos equals and then use the curly brace syntax because I'm passing in an actual JavaScript value, not a string. I can say to-dos equals to-dos. And now, if we come back over here, we'll see that the props of the to-do component now contains this list. Well, watch what happens when I uncheck show completed. Hold on. Oh, I made a stupid mistake. To-dos doesn't equal to-dos. To-dos equals filter to-dos. You guys probably caught that, and I apologize. Okay, so now what happens when we we uncheck show completed? Let's talk about what happens when we click that. When we click that, the onChange event handler is fired, which invokes onShowCompleted changed, which then invokes this.setState, which then updates the filter. Then the this.setState signals to React that it needs to be re-rendered. Then it refilters out the to-dos, and then doesn't create the to-do list, but uses the to-do list and repasses in the filter to-dos into the to-dos property. Meaning every time I uncheck and check this, notice how this time I only got 2 arrays, or 2 items in the array, both not completed. But if I check it, this time I got 4 to-do objects. And that is basically a stateless component. There's one last thing about stateless components, and this is just a matter of using the deconstruction operator. I often do use the object deconstruction inside of stateless components. So I open up curlies here, and I do to-dos, and now I can console log out to-dos. So those curlies are important. I'm deconstructing the parameter. Again, I talk about deconstructing and using modern JavaScript today where we go over ES 2015 features. But as we see, we're now just rendering out the to-dos. But yeah, that is stateless components. They're just functions. So again, these are the 2 main ways to create components in React now, the 2 modern ways. We either use a stateless component, which is just a function that returns JSX and receives properties, or we create a class. One more thing. This is just an aside. Don't actually follow along with this. If we passed in children to this, such as li hey, li whoa. If we pass in children to the stateless function or the stateless component or any other component, you'll actually notice that those children get sent in as a list of elements from the children array. So there's a property called children. So never create a custom property called children in your components at all, whether they're stateless or stateful, because children is kind of a reserved thing for when you pass in additional items underneath a custom component. But this opens up a lot of possibilities as far as creating basically your own DSL, your own domain-specific language, where you can reuse so much code like a tab group or a dialog or whatever by being able to pass in children like that. But that wraps up the video on stateless components, and we'll see you in the next one.